Welcome back to the channel, guys, and in this video we're going to talk about the next major problem that I want to solve on my home lab, and that is IP address assignment. Trying to understand what devices on your network are doing, who do they belong to, because how do you actually understand the traffic patterns, what the devices are talking to, what's been blocked, and it also helps you understand what your kids are doing on your own network too. And if you're interested in learning how to do this, you're in the right place, because that's exactly what we're going to jump into next. Because honestly, this is just not healthy, even from standard maintenance on your home network. As you grow older, it's just not like when I want to do this, I really don't want to do SSH at an IP address. I really can't be bothered with that. I want to do something like SSH at pi01.local or pi01.home, something along those lines. That's a lot more easier to remember, because that's a naming convention we can introduce, pi01. If you're interested in that, stay tuned, roll the ducks, let's jump into the tutorial part. So to begin with, we're going to start with your router on your home network. I use ASUS. It's a very expensive router that I picked quite a long time ago. And the journey begins in the local area network section of your router, or also known as your gateway. Then we flick over to DHCP. And DHCP simply means let me take care of handling IP assignment for new devices that connect to your network. That's all it basically means. And then what it does is then it informs the client that's joined the network of where the DNS server lives. So when you come into this area for the first time, typically on an ASUS router, your DHCP server will be turned on. What we're going to do is we're going to turn it off, and then what that means is that it's no longer going to advertise the DNS server settings, which is actually that's the pi hole, and this just gets ignored. And if anything goes wrong, we can turn it back on again, and then it won't be no harm, no foul. If anything goes wrong, it's a good backup strategy. That's what we want. We need a backup strategy. And then right at the very end, we will hit apply, and then on the pi hole server itself, head over to settings, head over to DHCP, turn it on, copy in your IP address assignment range. You can just take that from here, same settings from over here. You tell it the gateway, which is your router. It's quite nicely labeled router. That's your clue. I've turned on rapid DHCP assignment, which is very useful for when wireless devices connect. I didn't bother assigning a lease time, because it says in there the lease time is defaulted to an hour, which works for me. I'm not that network savvy, so I don't know if there's any favorable balance of lease time of a day, a week. Who knows? I really don't know. And then come down here. So I have not turned the feature on yet, so there's no active leases on the network. And then what I've gone ahead and done is I've gone ahead and grabbed from my router a few MAC addresses and IP addresses and names which I want to stick with, mainly my Raspberry Pi server name and the MAC address, and I've also taken my PC's MAC address, as you can see there, 216. And on the right hand side you can see some examples of how this it looks like to be a free text box, and how they want the text box to be formatted. And it's basically MAC address, IP address, and name, and it seems to be comma delimited. And the moment I click save and apply, we're going to find out what happens and if this whole thing works. And according to my trusty Gemini session, there is an actual checklist of sequence of events. So we're going to go router first, DHCP server, turn on that, click apply, turn it to off. On your pi hole server, change the gateway, ensure it's turned on, scroll down, hit save. And on your computer, we're going to force the DNS and the DHCP IP assignment leases to be forced to refresh. And I might just do the more pathetic way, which is just restart my machine and just see what happens. So we're going to hit pause from now, and then we'll see what happens next. So I wanted to bring you guys back to the original thing that we set out to do. The whole goal of this video was to introduce Pi-hole as the DHCP server, so that we get dynamic host names appearing in the clients list, so you can understand what devices on your network, what they're doing, what they're allowed to talk to, what they are blocked from seeing. And then obviously rattling down the list of, well, eventually you'll get down to a bunch of IP addresses that you won't have no idea what they represent, but then you can actually start using the network telemetry that you can see to understand what they are, who's possibly using it, and if you've got any potential rogue actors on your network doing things that you had no idea. So that was the goal. The goal was that I no longer want to see IP addresses in this list. I just want to try and see what the devices on my network are doing. And just to give you some proof, I actually did get this working. So on my Pi-hole dashboard, when you scroll down, you can actually see that I've actually got the host names from these devices are now starting to appear through DHCP. So when the DHCP registration packet goes out, it sends its name alongside the packet. And in this instance, you can see my PC is sending NZXT PC. You can see the Apple hardware sends along Mac and then phones and everything, the Sonos speakers in the house. So their own host names are being advertised when they try to join the network through a DHCP request. So that's proof I did get it working, but unfortunately I hit a 90-minute internet black hole, complete blackout for 90 minutes, and I had no network, no DNS, no DHCP, no network connectivity. I was completely locked out. There were children at home, and it was a very hard almost 2 hours getting things fixed and up and running again. And it was completely self-inflicted, and it's impossible to know if, my trusty sidekick Gemini let me down because the quality of my prompt was poor. I actually do have access to Gemini Pro through Copilot, through GitHub. I actually pay for it for my work. I have no idea why I didn't bother to actually kick off sessions. In here you can see I've done a few, but it's just not organic or natural to me. I'm used to the Cloud Code desktop world, and I'm used to the Visual Studio Copilot integration. This is where I tend to do a lot of my work, even for home stuff. But regardless, Gemini let me down because I hit some massive gotchas, and the reality of it was, if you're going to change your Pi server into becoming your DHCP server, which ultimately that's what it is, because you've got a Pi-hole running on there, then what happens when you restart or renew the network connection or the IP address for your Pi server? Where's it going to grab that IP address from? Gemini failed to tell me about this, so this is how much trust and faith I put in Gemini. Once again, is it the quality of the prompt I put in? Possibly. This is the power of prompt engineering, right? You don't ask, you don't know. You don't get, you don't know. That's where I got massively stuck. And I put all my learnings into Visual Studio, into my actual active session, when I keep all my config for what I run on my Pi server, so my vibe coding project and my Pi-hole config. And I want to do a shameless plug. If you want my working config for my Pi-hole server, which has been fully decoupled from my actual vibe coding project, so you can run it independently with all my working config, drop me a like on the video. Sub to the channel. I really appreciate it, because these videos really are hard work. Please subscribe to the channel, because it takes a lot of effort producing these videos, and I'll be happy to send this to you through a private GitHub repo, and you can just pull them as you see fit. And you can just ping me on Blue Sky, you can ping me on TikTok. Those are the easiest places where you can grab me and send me the look, I've subbed to your channel, please send me your stuff. That's it. Anyway, so shameless plugging aside, I keep my stuff in here, and I captured all my findings into Claude, and I asked Claude to produce a transcript of all of the things that went wrong. And once again, it was completely self-inflicted, and I want to do a separate video of the power of Claude when you've got like SSH access as a tool built into your PC, because Claude can do so much more debugging diagnostics for you that you just wouldn't believe. So I got Claude once I was able to restore connectivity on this machine. So if you just look at things at a high level, I was just trying to renew the IP lease on my Pi server. That's when things went wrong, because I ran the Linux equivalent of an IP address renewal on the Pi itself. That's where it failed. The SSH connection failed. It just hung up because the Pi rebooted, but because it was set to dynamic for its DHCP settings, it actually couldn't get an IP address because the DHCP server at the time, which was my Asus router, had been turned off. I completely turned it off because I want the Pi to serve everything. But that's when things started going wrong, and I had no idea where to start fixing things from. And the first obvious place to start was you have to fix your own network connection so that your PC, where you're working from, can talk out, and you can start doing some preliminary early investigation work. And that's kind of where I got to with Gemini, where I was getting stuck before I got into Claude to do a lot more deep dive debugging. And I had to essentially put some static settings back into my PC. And now you can do this through the new Windows 11 networks and GUI. This is Microsoft have slowly started migrating everything across. But some of us old school Windows users will know that I could actually get into the old pre-Windows 10, Windows Vista GUIs. And I'm used to this world, so you can go into here And you can do it the old school way, which is basically changing the settings manually in here, waiting for the changes to reflect. I noticed that on my machine took about 30 seconds before the internet connected symbol popped up, and then from there I was able to start understanding what the hell went wrong with my network. And then my instant protocol was going back to Claude in VS Code and trying to figure out, well, where did it go wrong? And so that restored my connection. Then Claude said, look, you need to connect to your machine and you need to apply some static settings. And that's when the second world of pain began, because my actual Pi server is in a network cabinet rack in my garage. So that means I had to disconnect it, bring it back to my office, manually attach it to my PC, attach mobile internet to it because it's got Wi-Fi support so that I can get it back onto the internet. And then so that I could then grab this command from one of my Claude chat sessions. So that was a massive labor of work. But then the great thing about it was that Linux is so damn quick. It instantly told me straight away that I was connected to my home network. And this is the main thing that I needed to tell it. That's where the gateway is, address range. We don't want it to be dynamic when it grabs its IP address. We want it to be manual. And then we have to tell it which connection on the Pi to use, which is the only wired connection you have, which is Ethernet port 1. And then we brought it back up again. So connection modification, bring the connection up. And that's fixed everything. And the next step was I restarted the Pi a few times to verify that every time it rebooted, because I run it in a headless fashion because I just use RDP and SSH to get into it. That basically solved the first part, but it just wasn't obvious, because when you attach your router on your home network and you set it up for internet access, DHCP and everything else that it does, you've never once stopped to think that, well, who assigns the IP address for your router itself? And it's almost like one of those things you forget about, you take for granted, but it's almost like a standards driven convention thing. It's just a known thing that the device that hands out and handles all your DHCP, it needs its own manual static settings so it can withstand and support manual restarts or unexpected restarts. So that's three massive gotchas, which is restoring the internet connection settings on your main PC so you can continue working to figure out what went wrong, manually connecting to your Raspberry Pi server to restore its actual connectivity, and giving it manual IP settings so it no longer has to rely on anything to provide its connection information and IP information, because it should be static, it should be manual, you should never need to change it again. And then the fourth thing was put it back into cabinet again, verifying that I could still talk to it, so I could still SSH into it to verify that I can connect into it and verify that it's working. And that's how many gotchas that I had to run into. But once I got it working, it was kind of brilliant. But it's just, you don't think about these things because you blindly are following Gemini and you think it's covered everything. And this is the thing of prompt engineering. The more time you take engineering and thinking about the quality of the information you put into your prompt, the more these tools will help you. And I think, once again, I'm going to go back by saying this is self-inflicted. I think I did this to myself. But we've got the transcript, and here's what actually was happening. Pi-hole container is the DHCP server for my network before this incident. DHCP was disabled. A Pi-hole was handing out all the IP addresses. Here's the thing, I hadn't thought about the Pi itself was undynamic. It couldn't get its own IP address from itself. So when it rebooted, Ethernet comes up asking for IP versus DHCP. Nobody answers on the broadcast. So then you're stuck in this loop. So recovering the IP for the PC first, physically fixing the IP for the Pi. And these are now, that's kind of where I am now with it. Because now that I have it working, and I'm really happy that I got to learn how to do this properly, because I had it working and I could have just left it there, but something inside of me, the engineer inside of me, told me restart the server, see what happens, renew the IP address, see what happens. And that's ultimately what led down this massive rabbit hole. But hopefully this 10 minutes of this portion of the video will have served you well, and I appreciate you for sticking around. So yes, that gets you through the bulk of all the gotchas, and hopefully you can get to the good stuff, which is basically where your actual network starts telling you what's actually going on. And we've achieved our goal, which is getting your Pi server itself set up as a DHCP. But there's one thing that I needed to mention before I also let it go. This is a potential gotcha 4 or 5, depending on how you see things. Depending on the Docker networking mode you set up, so host versus bridge mode, it will depend on whether the Pi-hole server running on the Pi can actually see broadcast requests when they come in from the network onto your Pi, because it will not be able to respond to them. So the final gotcha was Docker networking mode. And now for most people, they probably won't be running a Pi-hole through Docker. I just wanted to put it through Docker because I like the idea of scripted configuration. If anything goes wrong, I can restore things simply because there's an abstraction layer between the server and what I want, and that's the scripting layer, and that's what config and Docker kind of gives you, and that's my main real preference for it, the virtualization that Docker gives you. And in this particular instance, a massive gotcha that I didn't anticipate was that if you hide your Docker containers in a local bridge network, then they cannot respond and see DHCP requests when they come into the server. So if you tell all your devices on your network, that there's a DHCP server sat here, and then they can get their local DNS and DNS settings from here, they can get their IP assignment from here, but if nothing on the actual Pi itself responds, then you're going to get into a bit of trouble. And that's kind of how my PC got locked out and all the other devices got locked out, because they couldn't grab an IP address at all. And the fix for this was that there is actually a setting in Docker that you can use for network mode host. This is actually the most crucial fix, the most crucial gotcha at all. What this does is that it allows Pi-hole to basically respond and listen to DHCP requests when they hit the host, which is the Pi itself. And that is it. That is all the gotchas that you need to be made aware of if you're looking to replicate my setup. But one special mention I wanted to put in is on your DNS settings, you can actually default the name. So on mine, I was getting like .lan. I actually don't like .lan, so you can see the TV downstairs has not been turned on since I changed the settings, and it's still being referred to with the suffix of .lan. I actually don't like that. You can change that here, and I've just called mine .home. And number 2, never forward non-fully qualified domain requests. That's really good. If none of these things actually make any sense to you, you can actually do a screen grab like this with Windows snipping tool. You can have a screen grab, paste it into your LLM of choice. You can actually ask your LLM to explain these settings to you that you see in Pi-hole. It's actually brilliant. And then set the actual chat output, that the prompt when it responds, say, talk to me as though I'm an IT novice, an IT administrator novice. And it will basically guide you through it. It's really good for stuff like this in terms of holding your hand. So yeah, you can get it to explain these settings to you so you fully understand and appreciate what they are. But I recommend turning them on. And then finally, in your local DNS settings is where you can actually start setting up DNS names that actually matter to you. So for example, I've set one up for the Raspberry Pi itself because I don't want to use 101 IP address anymore. I've set some up for my vibe coding projects. You can see here pi-hole.remote, that's what we use to get in. As you can see, we've got proper SSL and everything set up for it, so it's nice and fully encrypted. You've also got the static settings down here, which is also worth a special mention, where you've kind of got this whole thing down here where you've got your MAC address, your local IP address on your network, and the name of the device. Once again, no one on the internet can see any of this unless your network is left open or compromised. But you can use this part here to set up your like actual static IP settings that you want to be fixed and the names you want them to be associated with. But other than that, that's it. That's the most brilliant part of it, because now when I actually use remote desktop to get into my Pi, if I ever wanted to, rather than actually using the IP address, which is just ugly, I can actually pick one of the names I've given it. And that's the whole point of what I set out to do. I actually didn't want to go down the path of ugly IPs, because that's just how you start. Everything has an IP address. But honestly, thank you so much for tuning in. This gotcha section turned out to be way longer than anticipated, but thank you for tuning in. I really appreciate it, and I'll see you in the next one. Thank you for tuning in, guys. These videos are a massive labor of love, and they take a lot of effort to produce, and they're quite painstaking, especially when I document detail all the mistakes that I've made. But it's the 4th or 5th major project video that I've done for the Raspberry Pi. I've still got other stuff that I do eventually want to cover, but for now, this was the more network orientated video that I really wanted to get my hands stuck into. But thank you for subbing to the channel. If you've learned something, please do sub. It gives me confidence, it inspires me to keep sharing my tinkering that I do. Because I am a coder, there's still things I want to talk about on the whole vibe coding front, the whole cloud front. There's containers that I want to run on my home network for monitoring and things like that. For example, there's a new Pi-hole upgrade that's available from last quarter, which I haven't bothered to look into. So there's loads of material to talk about yet, but these videos take time. So thank you for sticking with me, and I'll see you in the next one.